from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, crypto markets roiling after more tweets from Elon Musk. Joe's drops, then surges. Coinbase finally adds it to its platform. Meantime, Jack Dorsey's Square halts more purchases of Bitcoin, with the world's largest cryptocurrency just above 50,000. Plus, companies as big as Disney are rushing to reassess their mask policies after new guidance from the CDC. But turns out a lot of businesses and a lot of us, quite frankly, are confused and not quite ready. And Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky expects the travel rebound of a century, but that mass travel and business travel will never come back the way they once were. And a new trend, living on Airbnb. He says longer-term stays as remote work continues will live on. He joins us to tell us more. But first, we start with one of the most volatile weeks in crypto history, with a single tweet from Elon Musk wiping hundreds of millions of dollars off crypto markets. Some of that has been recovered, namely in Doge, following yet another endorsement from Musk and Coinbase officially bringing Doge onto its platform. But Bitcoin is still down since Musk announced Tesla would stop accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment for electric cars, and Jack Dorsey's Square today halted Bitcoin purchases altogether. Joining us now to discuss, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow and co-host of What'd You Miss, Joe Weisenthal. So, Joe, we can't blame everything on Elon Musk, but when you look closely, most of these moves seem to have to do with Elon Musk, don't they?
Yeah, you can't blame everything on Elon, unfortunately. Bitcoin itself kind of had been looking weak. It actually had had already been below its highs from like February, kind of been going sideways for a while. Some of the momentum with ETH and some of the other coins. But look, when when Tesla bought Bitcoin back in February or back earlier this year, that was seen as such a key signal, enthusiasm, excitement, the most cutting edge company in the world, putting its weight behind it. Laser eyes Elon, and then to see him turn around and to specifically cite the energy thing, which we know is a source of angst for the communities because regulators care about that stuff. I do think it's a blow to Bitcoin.
Meantime, Tesla down big time for the week has had to be pretty transparent about how it's benefiting and not benefiting from its Bitcoin investments. It is still holding Bitcoin, just right now not accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment. What did Tesla show us this week?
Yeah, so Tesla shares down the most 1 week loss since February. It's about communication, like Joe says, right? In the first quarter of this year, a fifth of their pre-tax profit was the gain that they made on Bitcoin. During the earnings call, Zach Kirkhorn basically said, we're monitoring the situation very closely. His words, we will continue to accept Bitcoin as a point of payment for our vehicles, and then through that mechanism, we'll build up our own Bitcoin holdings. And then just a matter of weeks, 2 weeks later, Elon Musk tweets a contradictory statement. And I think the other element of it is a surprise. Don't forget that Tesla is also an energy company. It might only be 6% of revenue, but one would assume that Elon Musk has some knowledge in the area of renewable energy and energy storage, because that's what he's trying to do with his company. So for lots of people, they were confused. Why is Elon only now talking about the energy consumption side of Bitcoin?
And that's Tesla's holding of Bitcoin, but do we know anything about Elon Musk's personal holdings of cryptocurrencies? Well, the IRS, as you know, now requires individuals to disclose their Bitcoin transactions on their financial or tax returns. The difficulty with Elon Musk is that it's very difficult to extrapolate and separate the man who is a public company chief executive, fiduciary director, and the world's second largest, richest man. We don't know what his own personal holdings are. We know, jokingly or otherwise, that he has a position on Dogecoin. We know, jokingly or otherwise, that he's interested broadly on cryptocurrencies. In some ways, he puts his money where his mouth is through Tesla, but we don't know what his own personal holdings in or how much of his own wealth is tied up in cryptocurrencies. Now, I spoke to Emily Choi, the president and COO of Coinbase, around earnings yesterday and asked about Elon's comments, the criticism about energy use from him and from others more broadly. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Do you think that there are a lot of other industries and devices that consume a lot more energy than Bitcoin? And so you have to put things into perspective, like Christmas lights and dryers and game consoles. So put things in perspective, but we want to have these dialogues and we want Elon to participate. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something bigger behind that.
So, Joe, indicating there she thinks there could be something bigger behind his, whatever is happening here. I mean, would you agree there seems to be something more to this, Joe?
I mean, who knows? It's hard to say. Like, how could any of us really get inside his head? You know, she mentioned that there certainly are a lot of other things that use way more energy than cryptocurrencies. But I think the point is most people have accepted that those are things that are good. People like watching TV, people like traveling. The problem is that the industry is yet to convince a lot of people that there is something intrinsically good about cryptocurrencies. Now, there are arguments to be made that it's good, but a lot of people look at it and say there is no use for this technology and it's all speculation and get rich quick and stuff like that. Now, again, this is disputed, but ultimately that's what it comes down to. Like, no one really questions the energy usage of refrigerators because we think that preserving food is a good thing. And so ultimately, that is the debate that's got to happen, not the energy use itself, but the argument that the people in the industry need to convince more people that the expenditure of the energy is on something that's a net positive and not just something for speculators.
Yeah, and you give Elon the benefit of the doubt, right? He tweeted that chart from the Cambridge data, which showed that huge run-up in energy consumption tied to Bitcoin for the first 3 months of this year. You know, basically him saying, this is a more recent phenomenon. I'm aware of the long-term energy consumption debate, that a lot of Bitcoin mining goes on in China, where coal is the main driver of energy output. And he seems to be suggesting that this is new to him. But again, he's the expert, or so he claims to be. So it's very confusing for those retail investors in particular that are buying into Bitcoin, buying into Tesla in symmetry, because they hang on Elon Musk's every single word.
So here's my question. You know, obviously, crypto markets on a roller coaster this week, a lot in part because of these tweets from Elon Musk, bashing Bitcoin, supporting Doge. Joe, is there any indication that there could be some regulatory issue here? Is there an SEC violation in there or something? I mean, could these comments at some point warrant greater oversight?
I mean, look, there's no real reason to think that he's like profiting in any obvious way from some of this in some untoward way, or that he's like tricking people. I mean, he seems fairly straightforward. You're allowed to change your mind on your investments. You're allowed to change your mind on what your company's going to hold and so forth. He's not a Doge insider or anything like that. That being said, I mean, I think this is probably still an under-regulated area on some level from the perspective of people in DC. And I know one of the priorities for the industry, some sort of Bitcoin ETF at some point, but I think it's clear there's still a lot of questions ongoing. And also, I think the energy thing is still a big source of concern for regulators. Do they want to create more avenues for money to flow into a space at the same time that this administration considers climate change and energy usage a source of a concern, a priority? I think there are just still a lot of questions overall beyond, Elon's tweets.
Absolutely. All right, Joe Weisenthal, co-host of What'd You Miss, our Ed Ludlow. Thank you both for joining us for this crypto debate today. I want to stay on the topic of crypto. Brex, a startup that provides corporate credit cards, is now opening its rewards program to include Bitcoin and Ethereum. The company says this first ever crypto rewards program for businesses will allow customers to use crypto points the same way they redeem Brex points for miles, cash, or travel. Joining us now to discuss, Brex co-founder and CEO Enrique Dubugra. Enrique, thank you so much for joining us. So obviously, there's a lot of controversy right now about cryptocurrency. It's up, it's down. I mean, do you have any concerns now offering this rewards program about just how volatile and unpredictable the market seems to be?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. What we're doing is we're giving our customers choice. You have Brex points and you can choose to redeem it for cash, for miles, for gift cards, and for crypto now. So for those businesses or consumers, behind these businesses who want to buy into crypto, into Bitcoin, they're true believers and they want to keep doing it, we have the option. Versus if you still want to redeem your Brex points and miles like you always done or in cashback, that's still possible.
What about Dogecoin? I mean, what if that's what your customers want? Would you offer them that option?
So Bitcoin Ethereum is our first step. We launched this now, and we're seeing how our customers react, how much they redeem, and what they will ask for. In theory, we have nothing against Dogecoin or any other coin. It's something we'll learn a little bit over time. So we try to not have an opinion on the coin itself. We're trying to make it available for our businesses to participate in it.
How much interest is there for this among your customers? Has this driven a ton of new interest or business?
It's been surprisingly, it's been more than we expected, let's put it like that. I think there's a lot of crypto enthusiasts, and obviously there's a lot of other, I would say, crypto companies offering cards. But I think Brex was the first general business card in, an all-in-one finance platform that also offered crypto and not a crypto-specific business. So I think that's what's getting our customers very excited, that they can use Brex for their regular spend, their regular transactions, but also redeem in crypto.
Meantime, as we were talking about earlier, there are concerns about regulation. There are concerns about the environment, the energy that Bitcoin and crypto mining consume. Is that something that you're thinking about?
I think that's definitely something we're seeing in the market, and we understand kind of the arguments pro Bitcoin, but also against Bitcoin. And we decided to take the stance of letting our customers choose what they want to do with their points.
So what's next for Brex? Obviously, I know we're focusing today on crypto, but obviously you've got broader ambitions, much more to the company beyond that. Talk about what's next for you.
For us, we're building what we call the all-in-one finance for businesses. So before, Brex was only a corporate card. And now you can replace your corporate card, your corporate Chase bank account, your American Express, or ExpensiFindYourBill.com. You can have this all-in-one finance product with Brex. I think the next step for us is keep building and developing these products to new markets, different segments, but also to larger companies.
All right. Enrique Dubugras, CEO of Brex. Enrique, thank you so much for joining us. We'll keep our eye on you. Meantime, some breaking news. Walmart now says that vaccinated customers can shop without a mask. The company, the retail conglomerate, saying it'll give $75, in fact, to all vaccinated workers. Of course, still a lot of questions how this will actually work. How will they know if people are vaccinated or not? We're going to talk about this more later in the show. The new and surprising guidelines from the CDC, how businesses are reassessing their policies, more coming up on the show. Also, after serious pressure from the United States, DarkSide, the hacking group suspected of being behind the Colonial Pipeline hack, has shut down its service. We'll have that story next. This is Bloomberg.
This cannot be open season for hackers who can make money off of a threat, even if they don't go as far as crippling the entity that as with Colonial, they did not.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi there in response to a question about ransom for cyber attacks, saying companies like Colonial Pipeline shouldn't pay up. Now, the group suspected of being behind the massive Colonial Pipeline attack has told other hackers that it plans to shut down its ransomware as a service operation amid pressure from law enforcement. Let's get the details from Bloomberg's Kartikay Mehrotra. Kartikay, first of all, it's almost shocking that ransomware as a service exists. But what is the latest that we know about DarkSide's plans? And if they didn't want to wreak havoc, then why did they do this at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think clearly they got what they were looking for. My colleagues on the cybersecurity team broke news earlier this week that that Colonial Pipeline did pay something close to $5 million in Bitcoin, which is all these revenue-generating attackers are looking for. And so since then, we've learned that DarkSide, claiming pressure from law enforcement, has pulled the plug on some of its operations, or they're actually claiming that law enforcement has taken them down. It's unclear exactly what's happened. But what is clear is that their public-facing persona and their websites are now no longer accessible, which means that if you've been encrypted by DarkSide and you haven't paid yet, you're in a difficult position. But at the same time, the attackers are likely going to go on pause, at least those who are affiliated with DarkSide.
So here's the question, and like Speaker Pelosi said, why should hackers be able to wreak havoc why should they be able to extract this kind of money, and shouldn't, I don't know, governments or someone be able to help companies, especially critical companies like this that are part of our infrastructure that are put in this position?
Absolutely. This is a problem that is not new. Ransomware has been evolving for the last decade, and cyber researchers have been screaming for the rooftops for the government to take it more seriously. It appears that the Biden administration has turned the corner on cybersecurity more broadly. In the opening days of the administration, they hired new leadership to focus on cybersecurity, area that was gutted under President Trump. And since then, they've launched a new cybersecurity and ransomware task force under the Justice Department, which will focus on addressing issues like this specific case of the Colonial Pipeline. Obviously, what is central to any operation would be ensuring that American critical infrastructure, an attack on which could be seen as an act of war, can be prevented, mitigated, or responded to appropriately. But at the same time, every single day, you have local school districts, local governments, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals that provide essential healthcare services getting hacked by groups like DarkSide, and they obviously have very little resources to respond, not like perhaps a major energy company. And so the federal government does need to take action, and through this task force and another task force that advised the government late last week, they seem to be putting pressure on these hackers to cut it out. But ultimately, it depends on whether the Russian government, for whom a lot of these entities operate or under their protection they operate, to really cut down on sanctioning this behavior. And there's no indication that Putin or Russian leadership are in a position to do that or ready to do that.
All right, Bloomberg's Kartike Mehrotra. Kartike, thanks so much for your reporting there, and of course that huge scoop that indeed DarkSide got paid. Coming up, the CDC's abrupt guidance on wearing masks has forced companies to change their policies. Walmart now saying that fully vaccinated shoppers can shop without wearing them. Much more next. This is Bloomberg. Walmart says fully vaccinated shoppers can shop without wearing masks, and that vaccinated staff can stop wearing masks as of next week. It'll also give $75 to employees upon their vaccinations. This as companies are rushing to assess their mask policies after a sudden announcement by U.S. officials put newly relaxed federal guidelines in conflict with the rules at many businesses. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Matt Boyle, who's been reporting on this evolution. And Matt, obviously this news from Walmart is big. My first question is, how will Walmart know if shoppers are vaccinated and they come in maskless? Are they going to check everyone's vaccine cards?
Well, that's the problem. With all of these things, the devil is in the details. It reminds me of, last year when Walmart and other retailers, insisted that everybody wear masks for safety, but they said, if you have a health reason, you didn't need to wear one. But of course, they weren't checking that. They didn't require a doctor's note. And with this, with today's decision, no, they're not going to require, customer to produce their vaccine vaccination card, which of course doesn't fit in my wallet, but that's a different story. They're not going to require that. Now, for employees, though, they are going to have to answer sort of a health check to sort of at least admit that, and vouch that they have been vaccinated. But you're right, with all these, with millions of customers coming through Walmart every month, it's going to get tricky. So I think Walmart has just decided, rather than try to keep enforcing a mask mandate when the CDC has gone in the other direction, they're just saying, as of today for customers, you can take them off.
Now, I spoke with Disney CEO Bob Chapek yesterday, who was just coming off the earnings call, which was only a couple hours after the CDC made that announcement. Asked him what this means for the parks, whether they'll be, quickly loosening mask policies there. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We're still digesting the guidance that was just given a few hours ago, but we think that's in the future for us, in the near future, in fact. And I think it's going to make for a much more comfortable experience this summer in the heat and humidity of Walt Disney World in Orlando.
Not just in the future, but in the near future, which, certainly interesting given that there's not going to be a vaccine for kids, young kids, at least until the fall. It could take even longer than that. What do you make of this, Matt? I mean, I know certainly there are many businesses out there trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, the level of confusion is pretty palpable right now. And it kind of comes down to, companies figuring out, what are their priorities in terms of their employees, their customers, how much interaction is there between, customers and employees. You're going to see more interaction, face-to-face interaction in a place like a restaurant, perhaps, or a retailer than, maybe a bank, for example. So all these companies and their HR departments are going to have to do some serious thinking. But I think a lot of them, this Walmart decision might give a lot of companies cover to say, well, this is what Walmart is doing. They are the nation's biggest private employer, and we might just go follow that route. But right now, Home Depot, for example, has signs right outside their door saying, we still expect you to mask up. So it's going to be a kind of case where customers might have to check their phone or figure out, what is the policy for any particular store or restaurant that they're going to these days.
Right. Interesting. Gosh, it's going to be interesting how this plays out over the next few weeks. Bloomberg's Matt Boyle, thanks so much for your reporting on this. All right. Coming up, DoorDash sales almost tripling in the first quarter, but can the food delivery giant continue this growth as restaurants begin to reopen? For in-dining customers, mask-free potentially. Our conversation with the CFO next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. We are getting to the tail end of earnings season, but tech companies are still reporting, and it's giving investors a lens into what life will look like as the post-pandemic picture improves. Our Ed Ludlow here with the latest and focusing in, Ed, on Airbnb and DoorDash.
Yeah, these are great companies to put under the microscope when it comes to how the world is changing with the vaccine, the reopening. DoorDash up 22%. This was a stock that dominated during COVID because we're all at home, we're ordering food to our homes. The idea was that's going to go away. No, resilient demand. And you can see what investors feel about it, that it's that stickiness. They gained market share. They did so well. Similarly with Airbnb, the other side of the equation, the world is reopening. We're traveling, we're going on vacation. Good time for Airbnb. And then poor Disney, down 2.5%. It missed on subscribers, but there's an area of the business that I want to look on in terms of the bright side of things. The next chart shows the happiest place on earth, Emily. You can see the recovery is there. Parks are reopening in California, in Florida, and what we saw in the latest quarter is that, yes, the recovery is pretty steady for Disney, even though they missed on subscribers for Disney+, which was a big focus for investors. The question that Wall Street raised on Friday, how much was that already priced into the stock anyway? The vaccine rollout's underway. Yes, parks reopening. Isn't that obvious? They didn't get the same feel-good effect that Airbnb is getting with that reopening and travel. And focusing in on Airbnb and DoorDash, we put the stocks side by side up on the board. It's a really difficult narrative to understand. Year to date, they're both in negative territory. Come with me right over to the left-hand side, that white line there, DoorDash. DoorDash up 20% today. If it had not been for that incredible gain, they'd be down 20% year to date because investors are really digesting, is this a reopening trade? Is this a stay-at-home trade? How long does ordering it in last for? How long do all of these trends that were accelerated by COVID last for? And Airbnb and DoorDash are really good case studies for that. You can see they move in really close symmetry, but ultimately they're still in negative territory year to date. Em.
All right, Ed, thanks for breaking that down. DoorDash CFO Prabir Adarkar says the delivery service wants to engage with consumers for pickups and even catering. That's in addition to delivery, adding that the company is just getting started in groceries. Take a listen to what else he had to say.
We're rooting for restaurants and we're excited for them to succeed. But what we're seeing is these two things can coexist because people want to go back into the restaurants, but they also, it's 25 times you eat during the week, and not all of those are going to be in the restaurant. Some of them are going to be delivered at home. Some of those are going to be picked up on your way back to work. Some of them are going to be catered food at lunch when you're in the office. And so we're attempting to engage the consumer across all of these different use cases in order to ensure that that we keep consumer behavior robust even as the markets reopen and restaurants reopen.
What segments and verticals are you seeing the most growth in? Like, can you give us any color on where the growth is coming from? Cities, suburbs, what kinds of restaurants? Any more you can say?
Sure. I mean, actually, we're seeing growth across the board. I mean, when you grow your top line by 222%, it's not usually one area or another. And what's driving that is we're very early innings in terms of the penetration of these categories. So even if you take all of the food delivery platforms across the space, just as a percentage of overall food sales, we're talking about a small percentage. We're a fraction into the overall food sales across the industry. When you look at convenience, which is another large category that we launched about a year ago, that's a $250 billion industry. Online convenience sales are, again, a tiny fraction, less than 1%, according to third-party data. Grocery, same dynamic. And so what you're seeing is, given the low levels of penetration, there's a lot of room for ourselves and others in the space to grow. And that's what's driving the growth that you're seeing this past quarter.
So let's talk about grocery. Uber's partnership with GoPuff, obviously Instacart gaining share. Grocery seems to be the next frontier. How are you preparing to take on the competition?
Sure. And the first thing I should say is we're very early in the grocery journey. That business was launched 6 months ago. But let me point to a parallel. We've got our convenience business that was launched 12 months ago, much after some of the other names that you mentioned. And even in that short duration of 12 months, we've quickly become the #1 leader in online convenience, according to third-party data. And what that speaks to is the extensibility of our platform, the size of the consumer base we have amassed, our ability to engage those consumers in categories beyond food. And that's what's enabled us to drive our growth and be a market leader in convenience. And I'm confident that if we continue to build a product that meets consumer expectations of speed and quality and price, we'll be successful in grocery as well as the other verticals we add.
My DoorDash app often asks me if I want to pick up from 7-Eleven after I place an order. How popular is that? Are people often taking you up on that offer?
It's very early. We actually just launched that a few months ago, but we're excited by the initial results that we've seen. In fact, from your perspective, from a consumer's perspective, there's no reason you should be concerned about which store something comes from. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day that ordered a cake for Mother's Day, and they wanted to buy a bouquet of flowers. And this consumer didn't care that the flowers came from a different store than the cake. And so our product now allows you to mix and match across these different stores, and it's early and we're excited by the prospects there.
So there's still this looming risk about the reclassification of workers. We don't know what position the Biden administration is going to take on this. How concerned are you about that, knowing that it could go in a direction that doesn't necessarily help DoorDash?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back from the initial headlines that even Secretary Walsh said were perhaps taken a little far. In fact, when you read the comments and based on our discussions with the Department of Labor and the Biden administration, we're actually encouraged by what we're hearing because it signals a willingness on the part of the Department of Labor to engage with the private sector to determine a mutually acceptable solution to this important issue going forward. And so, it's important that I reiterate that we will always advocate for what Dashers want. And what they tell us is that the number one thing they care about is flexibility paired with the benefits and protections they deserve. And so, we're excited to engage with the DOL and the Biden administration on this issue, and hopefully we'll have an update to this matter, in the future.
Prabir Adarkar, DoorDash CFO there. And sticking with earnings, I also caught up with Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky, who says signs indicate a travel rebound unlike anything seen in a century. And while shares fell shortly after earnings were reported, Chesky remains optimistic, with bookings in the first quarter beating the company's own internal expectations.
What I've said is I think this is going to be a travel rebound like we've never seen. I've never seen in my lifetime. Probably going to be a travel rebound like anything you've seen in a century. What we've seen is travelers in the United States over 60, the moment between February and March, as they started getting vaccinated, bookings for that cohort went up 60%. In countries like UK, Spain, France, when restrictions were lifted, bookings shot up. So the CDC, the head of CDC today said that if you're vaccinated, you can now resume activities you were doing before the pandemic. All of these data points are indicators that we think travel is going to come back probably stronger than ever. Certainly, we think we're going to be quite a beneficiary of this trend over the coming months. So we're very bullish on it.
And yet you've also reiterated that travel will never be quite the same. And I recently interviewed the CEO of Expedia, Peter Kern, and he sort of pushed back on that. He said national parks are nice, but I think cities, hotels, business travel even will fully rebound. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say, first of all, that the world's never going to look like it did before the pandemic. That means I don't think travel is going to look like it did before the pandemic. And I think the data is bearing that out. Number one, we commissioned surveys across the world, and people said travel is the out-of-home activity they missed the most. And business travel was the type of travel that they missed the least. Business travel is never coming back the way it was before the pandemic. It doesn't mean business travel is not coming back. It's just not coming back like it was before the pandemic. The reason why is the bar to get on a plane to go to a meeting is much higher. So there's going to be a mix shift from business travel to leisure travel. The kind of business travel that will emerge is the kind of business travel that we're benefiting from. For example, we have a huge percent of our nights booked in cities are now longer than 28 days because people are now working remotely, but they want to go back to the headquarters for weeks at a time. So we do think that's a big trend. But let me talk about some other trends that I think are here to stay. Guests now around the world on Airbnb are more flexible about where they travel and when they travel. A world where we can work on Zoom is a world where we can work anywhere, which is a world where we can kind of live anywhere. And what that means is people aren't just going to travel the same 20 or 30 cities. They're going to travel to 1,000 cities all over the world. It means length of stay is increasing. 2 years ago, 14% of our business was over 28 days. As I said, now it's 24%. And finally, people can travel anytime. In February, we launched a flexible date feature where we could ask you, when do you want to travel? Instead of adding exact dates, you could say, I want to go for a weekend, week, or a month, anytime this summer. We've had nearly 100 million searches using this new tool, nearly 100 million searches just since February. And what that means is that people are more flexible about where they travel. There's a shift from mass travel to meaningful travel and a shift from business travel to leisure. The last thing I just say is when borders open up and people go back to cities, we'll do quite well as well.
So let's talk about borders opening up. You've got new data on U.S. travelers to Europe. The situation in Europe still really volatile. And I'm curious what you're seeing in Europe and what visibility you have into your business in Asia and when the international rebound is coming.
There are certain countries that are doing really well in Europe. United Kingdom is growing quickly. France growing quickly. Spain now rebounding and growing quickly. So we're seeing a number of countries in the in the EU that are really growing. And I think one of the things we're seeing is initially it was domestic travel, people traveling in their own country. And now we're starting to see borders open up. And I think that's starting to see a huge rebound in Europe. Asia's a little behind. So you can think of North America, ahead, followed by Europe, followed by the rest of the world. So I do expect Asia to be a little bit further behind.
Meantime, you've launched your biggest marketing campaign in years to attract more users, to attract more hosts. And I'm curious how many hosts have signed on, new hosts have signed on as a result of the campaign and these commercials that I have to say, Brian, do pull at your heartstrings.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the commercials. We did our first global brand campaign in 5 years. They feature real photos of real guests on real Airbnb trips. And I do think that one of the reasons they pull your heartstrings is because I think we yearn for things we miss, being with our friends, being with our family, and having meaningful times together. And I think that's really kind of what Airbnb is about. So that's what we're focused on. Additionally, we are seeing elevated traffic levels of prospective hosts coming to Airbnb. And on May 24th, we're going to unveil the biggest upgrade to our service in 12 years, including ways to make it even easier to host. So we don't have any other data to report on the number of new listings right now, but I am very optimistic about the elevated traffic that we're seeing in prospective hosts, and we're going to continue to make it easier for people to start. The last thing I'll just say is if you list on Airbnb, 50% of people get a booking within 4 days.
You can catch that full interview at Bloomberg.com. Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky there. Meantime, Jack Dorsey's Square is not planning on buying more Bitcoin for its corporate treasuries. This according to a report by Financial News. The company lost $20 million on a $220 million investment in the cryptocurrency last quarter. Bitcoin represents about 5% of Square's cash on hand. Square CFO, in response apparently to that report, has officially said its Bitcoin strategy hasn't changed and the company will continue to assess that strategy in an ongoing basis. Jack Dorsey also just tweeted that Bitcoin changes everything for the better and we will forever work to make Bitcoin better, though did not dispute that report. Coming up, the Golden Globes controversy heating up with NBC deciding to axe the show from its 2022 schedule. Why? And what does this mean? Will the event be canceled? We'll have all the details next. This is Bloomberg. The NBC network is dropping the Golden Globes from next year's broadcast schedule, saying the Hollywood Foreign Press Association that puts on the annual awards show needs to reform its poor record on diversity. The association coming under fire earlier this week for having no Black members. For more, I want to bring in our Bloomberg Entertainment reporter, Kelly Gilblom from LA. So Kelly, it's no secret that the Hollywood Foreign Press has not been diverse enough for a very long time. What spurred this latest wave of protest?
Yeah, well, just to give a little background on this group, the HFPA, they're a group of journalists, about 90 or so, that work for foreign outlets and are based in Southern California. And there have been a few people that seemingly are qualified to join the group, but were rejected. And this led to some complaints, which led to an LA Times story, which revealed this kind of bombshell fact that you mentioned earlier, that they have no Black members and seemingly haven't had one for who knows how long. And just given everything that's happened in the past year with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think this fact really resonated with people for this group that's kind of this arbiter of culture and taste to be so totally out of step with what's going on in the world. So that became a big sticking point. And there's also been these allegations and questions for years swirling around about the nomination and award selection process for Golden Globes, people basically saying that you can buy one. And that's not particularly what you want to see in a show. You want to see things that are actually great, get awarded and recognized. So I think this just came to a head in the past 6 months or so. And that's what's kind of led to where we're at now.
So Tom Cruise has returned his Golden Globes that he won years ago, and now also NBC dropping the Golden Globes. Does this mean the Golden Globes are gone? Could they come back?
Yeah, what's interesting is this is actually not the first year that we've not had the Golden Globes 2022. They won't be happening at all unless the very unlikely occurrence that some other network has a different calculus than NBC and picks it up. So I think that they could come back, but I think that just given the fact they've become such a social pariah in Hollywood, they're going to have to really work hard to prove to people that they've changed. They did put forward some proposals of how they were going to diversify and prove to everybody that the award selection process was above board. And those proposals just got slammed by the studios, Netflix, Amazon, everybody, saying that that's too surface level and it's simply too slow. And they needed to see something much more substantive.
Well, and this does beg the question, a broader question about where these award shows go more broadly. Obviously, it's been a difficult year in COVID, but quickly, I mean, I know that the awards are important to the industry, important to the actors and all of the talent behind the scenes, but more broadly, do you see more of a reckoning on award shows happening in general, quickly?
Yeah, I think so. They've been losing relevance for a while and losing viewership. In the past year, this past Golden Globes only got 7 million viewers, an all-time low. Normally, it's more than 15 million. So I do think that they're kind of losing favor and losing sway. So this is part of a broader change happening in Hollywood.
Interesting. All right, Bloomberg's Kelly Gilblom. Kelly, thanks so much for your reporting here. We'll continue to follow what happens there, of course. Coming up, rip and replace. That's what's happening to Huawei's 5G towers across Europe as President Biden stands firm on U.S. sanctions against the Chinese company. We're going to take a closer look at that next. This is Bloomberg. It took almost a decade to install Huawei Technologies equipment across the UK, and now a 7-year and $700 million plan is underway to tear all of it down due to a US-led campaign against the Chinese company. Bloomberg's Nate Langston and Thomas Seal explain.
The process of ripping out 4G and 5G mobile equipment from thousands of network towers across Europe has begun. Countries including the UK, France and Sweden are making good on their decisions to side with a US-led campaign centered on its assertion that China's Huawei posed an unacceptable risk to national security, something that company has vehemently and repeatedly denied. Transplanting a decade's worth of investment into critical national communications infrastructure is expected to cost networks like Britain's biggest, BT, hundreds of millions of pounds and several years to complete. With work now underway, I wanted to know what the process involved. And that involved somebody travelling to Hull, birthplace of no less than John Venn, the man behind the Venn diagram, in the northern county of Yorkshire. Hull is the first British city in which the Huawei ban is becoming a reality for BT. It's working to cut out all the Chinese firm's equipment there by early July, substituting in components from Nokia. My colleague Tom Seal drew the short straw and headed up to Hull to bravely scale one of the towers and find out just how big a challenge this is.
And I discovered it's far more difficult than many people think, because it's not actually just Huawei's 5G equipment being removed, but the ubiquitous 4G base stations installed over the last decade as well. A typical swap might go like this. The company, BT in this instance, gets a landlord's permission for engineers to come on site, check where the antennas beam their signals and if they overlap with others, to avoid suddenly depriving thousands of people of data when one is turned off. Then multiple engineers will spend a few days up a pole or a building, often attaching themselves to harnesses for safety to remove components, including the familiar antennas seen worldwide.
The same is true in countries such as France, where phone companies have also begun removing Huawei equipment. And it's far from a cheap process. BT said last year it expects replacing Huawei to cost £500 million, or more than $650 million over the next 5 years.
That's on top of the money spent buying and installing it in the first place, don't forget. Some of the people I spoke to who designed the UK's networks are disappointed at seeing years of their work torn up. But the engineers themselves say it's good news for them. It's more work and they're not so worried about which company they're contracted to assist or why. On the other hand, as well as the hazards of working on a new, unknown site every week, there's been another hazard in 2020. Some engineers said they'd had abuse thrown at them by members of the public, and threats of attacks and arson due to the baseless conspiracy theories about 5G and its fabricated belief to spread coronavirus. I spoke to BT's Chief Technology Officer, who said those incidents have tailed off a bit, and that the company's swapped out Huawei at about 130 sites so far, or about 1% of those it needs to do. Hull is seen internally as an important test.
We were quite keen to pick, one city area and, if you like, do the whole of that and make sure that we can really check that we're not having an adverse impact on customer and customer service, and the signs are really good for that so far.
This is all an early glimpse at the Rip and Replace project set in motion by the White House's strict sanctions on Huawei, which the company's billionaire founder said as recently as February are unlikely to ease. If that's accurate, expect to see many more high-vis jackets on top of city buildings in the years to come. For more on what's happening with BT's work in Hull, don't miss Tom's full story on Bloomberg.com right now. For Quick Take in London, with Tom socially distanced on the other side of the studio over there, I'm Nate Langston, and we've been Technically Speaking.
Glad everyone's safe and sound there. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.